Every morning at 4:45 a.m., before the sky even thought about turning pink, she was already up. Not because she loved early hours, nobody really does, but because life had taught her that if you want things done right, you better be the one to do them, and you better start before anyone else is awake. She lived in a small apartment above a laundromat on the edge of town, where the hum of dryers never quite stopped even at night. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms, a narrow kitchenette, and a bathroom so tiny you had to close the toilet lid before you could shut the door. But it was clean, quiet in its own way and hers. She moved through her routine like a well-worn song, brush teeth, wash face, put on the same navy blue uniform she'd worn for nearly 20 years, now faded soft at the elbows. Her hair, mostly gray but with stubborn streaks of black near the temples, was pulled back into a low bun. No makeup, never had been. Not out of principle, just because there hadn't been time for that kind of thing in a very long time. By 5:15, she was out the door, thermos of strong black coffee in hand, walking the 10 blocks to Brookhaven High School. The streets were empty except for the occasional delivery truck or a dog walker bundled against the morning chill. She liked these quiet moments, the world still asleep, the air crisp, the chance to think without being asked for anything. Not that anyone was ever rude to her. Quite the opposite. But even kindness could be a kind of demand when you're always the one giving. At the school, she unlocked the back door to the cafeteria with a key that hung on a faded lanyard around her neck. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed to life, casting a pale glow over stainless steel counters, stacks of trays, and industrial-sized cans of green beans. She tied on her apron, checked the day's menu posted on the bulletin board, chicken tenders, mashed potatoes from a box, apple slices, and got to work. By 6:30, the first wave of kitchen staff arrived, chattering about weekend plans or their kids' soccer games. She smiled, nodded, offered a quiet good morning, but mostly kept to her station, peeling potatoes or slicing fruit with steady, practiced hands. No one really knew much about her. To the students, she was just the lunch lady, the woman who always gave extra tater tots to the skinny freshmen or remembered which seniors were allergic to dairy. To the teachers, she was reliable, polite, and invisible in the way people who serve others often become. She never complained, never missed a day, never asked for anything beyond her paycheck and the occasional day off to take her grandson to the doctor. That grandson, 12 years old, sharp-eyed and quiet like her, was the center of her world. His mother, her only child, had passed away 5 years ago from an illness that moved faster than anyone expected. One minute she was laughing on the phone about her son's science fair project. The next she was gone. The boy had come to live with her the week after the funeral, suitcase in hand, eyes red-rimmed but dry. He hadn't cried much since. Neither had she. Grief, they'd learned, didn't always make noise. She raised him the only way she knew how. With routine, with food on the table, with clean clothes and a firm homework before screens rule. She didn't have much to give, no fancy vacations, no new sneakers every season, but she gave everything she had. And somehow it was enough. He did well in school, kept to himself mostly, but lately he'd started humming little tunes under his breath. She'd catch him tapping rhythms on the kitchen table with his pencil. Once she found him watching piano tutorials on her old tablet late at night, the screen casting a soft blue light on his face. She never said anything. But she remembered. Long before the laundromat apartment, before the cafeteria hairnet and the aching knees from standing all day, there had been music. Real music, not the kind that played from phone speakers or school assemblies, but the kind that lived in your bones. She'd grown up in a small city south of the border, in a house with peeling paint and a piano in the living room that her grandfather had bought secondhand from a church. It wasn't much. Keys yellowed, one pedal loose, but to her it was magic. She was 7 the first time she touched it. Her fingers, small and clumsy, pressed down on middle C, and the sound filled the room like sunlight. She begged her mother for lessons. They couldn't afford a real teacher, so her mother traded sewing repairs for half an hour a week with an old man who played in the town square. He taught her scales, then simple melodies, then how to listen, not just with her ears but with her whole body. By 12, she was playing for weddings and funerals, for school plays and Sunday Mass. At 15, she won a local competition. The prize was a scholarship to a music conservatory in the capital. Her family scraped together bus fare, packed her one suitcase, and sent her off with tears and prayers. For 2 years, she lived in a dormitory with 6 other girls, practiced 6 hours a day, and dreamed of concert halls and recordings. She learned Chopin, Debussy, Bach, music that felt like breathing. Then her mother got sick. A cough that wouldn't go away turned into something worse. The letters from home grew urgent. The money for rent and food dried up. She came back thinking she'd stay a few months, help out, then return. But her mother never got better, and by the time the worst was over, the conservatory had moved on without her. The scholarship wasn't held. The spot was given to someone else. She tried to keep playing. Found a job teaching beginner piano to children in a community center, but the pay was barely enough for rent, and when her daughter was born, everything shifted again. Music became a luxury she couldn't afford. Not in time, not in energy, not in heart. The piano she'd saved for went unused, then sold. The sheet music gathered dust, then disappeared during a move. The only thing she kept was a small framed photo of her younger self at the conservatory, tucked in the back of a drawer. Now, decades later, music lived only in memory. She'd hear a song on the radio and feel a tug in her chest like a string pulled too tight. Sometimes when she was alone in the kitchen late at night, she'd press her fingers against the countertop and imagine the keys beneath them, playing the nocturne she'd once performed for her final recital, but she never told anyone. What was the point? That life felt like someone else's story now. At school, she stayed in the background. She ate lunch in the staff break room only when absolutely necessary, preferring to sit outside on a bench near the bike racks, watching students laugh and argue and text their friends. She liked seeing them so full of noise and possibility. It reminded her that the world kept turning, even when your own path felt narrow. The teachers were kind in their way. They said thank you when she refilled their coffee, wished her a happy birthday with a store-bought cupcake, included her name on the staff directory. But they didn't really see her. Not the way she saw them. The exhausted math teacher who always took extra carrots, the young history teacher who cried in the supply closet after a bad parent meeting, the janitor who saved the last chocolate milk for the smallest kindergartner every Friday. She noticed things. She always had. She didn't mind being unseen. In fact, it suited her. After losing so much, she'd learned that staying small kept you safe. Big dreams got broken. Big hopes got crushed. But if you kept your head down, did your work, loved your people quietly, maybe you could make it through without getting hurt again. Still, there were moments. Like when the school's old upright piano was wheeled into the auditorium for the annual talent show rehearsal. It had been stored in the band room for years, covered in dust, missing 2 keys and badly out of tune. The music teacher had tried to get it fixed, but the budget didn't allow for it. It's more of a prop now, he'd joked. But when she walked past it that afternoon carrying a tray of clean utensils back to the kitchen, she stopped. Just for a second. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She remembered the weight of a key under her hand, the vibration in her ribs when she played something deep and resonant. She shook her head slightly as if to clear the thought and kept walking. Later that evening at home, her grandson was doing homework at the kitchen table. She made beans and rice, set out tortillas, and poured him a glass of milk. "You okay, mijo?" she asked softly. He nodded, not looking up. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Do you think I could learn piano?" "Like for real?" Her heart did that strange little flip it hadn't done in years. She kept her voice calm. "Why do you ask?" "I saw this video. This kid, he's my age, and he played this whole song, like from memory. It was beautiful." She sat down across from him. "Music is beautiful," she said, "but it takes work. A lot of it. I don't mind working." She studied his face, the same serious eyes her daughter used to have. "We don't have a piano, mijo, I know. But maybe we could save up, or find a used one." She didn't say no. She didn't say yes. She just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We'll see," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine a different kind of future, not for her, but for him. That night, after he was asleep, she stood by the window, looking down at the streetlights reflecting in the puddles from an earlier rain. The laundromat below was quiet. Somewhere a car passed, and in the silence she hummed a few bars of the Chopin nocturne, softly so as not to wake him. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few days someone would ask her to sit at that broken piano in the auditorium. They'd think it was Nini, a joke. A harmless prank on the quiet lunch lady who never said much. They had no idea what was about to happen. But for now, in this moment, she was just a woman in a small apartment, holding a memory in her hands like a fragile bird, wondering if it was too late to let it fly. The week before the annual faculty talent show always brought a strange kind of energy to Brookhaven High. Posters went up in the hallways, brightly colored, hand-drawn things with cartoon microphones and musical notes. Teachers who normally kept to their classrooms started lingering near the auditorium, humming or practicing lines under their breath. Even the students seemed more alert, buzzing with rumors about who might perform and whether the chemistry teacher would finally do his infamous magic trick again. For most of the staff, the talent show was just a fun break from the usual grind, a chance to laugh, to be silly, to remember that they were people, not just lesson planners and grade enterers. But for a small group of younger teachers, it was also an opportunity to stir things up a little. Not in a mean way, they told themselves. Just playful, lighthearted, after all. School had been tough that year. Budget cuts, staffing shortages, endless meetings, and everyone needed to let loose. They gathered in the science lab after school one Tuesday, still buzzing from a successful pep rally. Someone had brought cookies and the mood was loose-easy. That's when the idea came up. Okay, but what if we get someone unexpected to go on stage? One of them said, leaning against a lab table still cluttered with beakers. Like someone nobody would ever guess had a talent. Like who? Another asked, mouthful of chocolate chip. They tossed out a few names, janitors, office aides, the quiet librarian, but nothing felt quite right. Then someone glanced toward the cafeteria doors, still open from lunch cleanup. What about her? All eyes turned. Through the glass partition, they could see her, standing by the industrial dishwasher, wiping down a tray with slow, careful movements. She looked exactly like she always did. Uniform neat, hair in its usual bun, face calm and unreadable. You mean the lunch lady? Someone said, half laughing. What's she gonna do? Recite the lunch menu in rhyme? No, wait, said the first teacher, eyes lighting up. Remember that old piano in the auditorium? The one that's totally busted? They all groaned in recognition. The piano had been a running joke for years, missing keys, out of tune, one pedal that squeaked like a startled mouse. The music department had long given up on it. It mostly served as a prop for drama class or a place for students to sit during assemblies. So here's the thing, the teacher continued, warming to the idea. We invite her to play it. Like as a joke. She'll sit down, hit a few keys, maybe make a funny face when it sounds awful, and everyone laughs. It's harmless, and honestly, it might even make her feel included. There was a pause. One of the group shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. What if she gets embarrassed? She won't, another chimed in quickly. She's always so sweet. She'll probably laugh along, and if she says no, we drop it. No big deal. They convinced themselves it was fine, friendly, just a bit of school spirit. They didn't think about the fact that they'd never really spoken to her beyond thanks for the coffee, or have a nice weekend. They didn't consider that maybe she had a life outside these walls. Dreams, losses, memories they knew nothing about. To them, she was part of the background, like the linoleum floors or the bell that rang between classes. Harmless, invisible. By Friday, the plan was set. The talent show was scheduled for that evening, 6:30 p.m. Open to staff, students, and a few parents. The auditorium filled quickly. Folding chairs were brought in to supplement the fixed seating. Balloons hung limply from the ceiling. They'd lost air by mid-afternoon. A student tech crew fiddled with microphones, and someone had strung fairy lights along the stage edge for ambiance. She wasn't planning to go. She never did. After a long day serving lunch, cleaning up, and prepping for the next morning, she usually went straight home to make dinner for her grandson. But that night he had a science club meeting at school, and he'd asked her to stay and watch his group present their volcano project during intermission. So she sat in the back row, near the exit in her street clothes for once, dark slacks and a soft cotton blouse. Her hair still in its bun but without the hairnet. She held a paper cup of water and watched the stage with quiet attention as the show began. First up was the drama teacher doing a dramatic reading from Shakespeare. Badly, on purpose. The crowd roared with laughter. Then a group of math teachers performed a surprisingly tight a cappella version of a pop song. The PE coach juggled tennis balls while riding a unicycle. He fell once but got a standing ovation anyway. Everyone was having fun. The room felt warm, full of easy joy. Then, during a lull between acts, one of the younger teachers stepped up to the mic. He was grinning, clearly enjoying the spotlight. "All right, folks," he said, "we've got a little surprise for you. You know how this show is all about hidden talents? Well, we found someone who's been hiding in plain sight." A few people chuckled, sensing a joke was coming. "She's the reason half of us made it through finals week without collapsing. Thanks to those extra chocolate chip cookies she slips into our lunch trays when we look stressed." More laughter. She felt her stomach tighten. She knew who they meant. She's always there, always kind, always working. But tonight we thought, hey, maybe she's got something else to share. The teacher turned and pointed toward the back of the room. "Come on up. We've got a special seat for you." Every head swiveled. Suddenly all eyes were on her. Her face went hot. She didn't move. Her grandson, sitting a few rows ahead with his science club, turned around confused. She gave him a small, tight smile. "It's okay." But her hands were trembling in her lap. The teacher waved her forward again, still smiling. "Don't be shy. We've got the perfect instrument waiting for you." Now the audience was clapping, gently at first, then more insistently. It wasn't malicious. They thought this was sweet, inclusive, funny. They didn't see the panic rising in her chest. They didn't know that being singled out like this, in front of everyone, felt like standing naked in a storm. But she couldn't say no. Not here, not now. If she refused, it would kill the mood. People would think she was rude, ungrateful, a spoilsport. And worse, her grandson was watching. She didn't want him to see her back down, to look small. So she stood. Her legs felt stiff, like they belonged to someone else. She walked slowly down the aisle, eyes fixed on the scuffed floor. The clapping grew louder. Someone whistled. She kept her shoulders back, chin level. "Just get through it," she told herself. Play one note, smile, sit back down. When she reached the stage, the teacher gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Thanks for doing this. We thought it'd be fun to have you try out our old piano. Let's just say it's got character." He gestured to the upright piano stage left. It looked even worse up close, dust on the lid, a crack in the wood near the base, several keys discolored or chipped. She recognized it immediately from the cafeteria hallway where it had sat for years before being moved. She'd walked past it hundreds of times, never daring to touch it. Now they wanted her to play it, as a joke. She could feel the weight of the room, the expectation, the amusement, the complete certainty that she had no idea what she was doing. And maybe that's what they expected. A fumble, a wrong note, a laughable attempt. She stepped toward the piano. The bench was hard, the seat worn smooth. She sat. Her hands hovered over the keys. They looked foreign to her now. Older, veins more visible, skin rough from dish soap and bleach. But beneath the surface, muscle memory stirred. Like a sleeping dog lifting its head, she took a breath, and then she remembered her grandson's voice from a few nights ago. "Do you think I could learn piano?" Like for real? He believed in beauty, in possibility, in things that mattered more than jokes. She wasn't doing this for them. She was doing it for him. Her fingers lowered. The first note rang out, clear, strong, despite the piano's flaws. It wasn't perfect. One string was dead, so the E-flat came out thin, almost ghostly. But she didn't flinch. She adjusted, compensated, let the silence between notes speak as loudly as the sound. She began to play, not a nursery rhyme, not a pop song, not something simple or silly. She played Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2 Pro. A piece she'd learned when she was 17, when music was her whole world. It was a song about longing, about quiet joy, about the kind of beauty that aches because it's so fragile, and she played it like she'd never stopped. Her left hand moved with deep, resonant chords, even though 2 of the bass strings were missing. She filled the gaps with rolled arpeggios, turning limitation into expression. Her right hand sang the melody, tender, fluid, full of feeling. She leaned into the broken keys, coaxed sound from the silent ones, made the piano weep and sigh and shimmer. The room changed. The laughter died instantly. The whispering stopped. Even the student running the lights froze, hand on the dimmer switch. At first, people just stared, confused. Is this really her? Then, as the music unfolded, disbelief turned to awe. A teacher in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. A student who'd been texting dropped his phone. The principal, standing near the curtain, forgot to breathe. The piano was broken, yes, but she wasn't. Every note carried decades of silence, of sacrifice, of love buried under duty. And now finally it was rising, like smoke from a long cold fire, like a bird taking flight after years in a cage. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes closed, lost in the music, in the memory of her younger self at the conservatory, in the feel of her daughter's small hand on her shoulder after a recital, in the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, her grandson would hear this and understand that dreams don't die. They just wait. The final chord hung in the air, trembling. Imperfect, but true. And then, silence. Not the awkward silence of a failed joke, but the stunned, sacred silence that comes after something real has happened. Then, like a wave breaking, the room erupted. Applause. Not polite clapping, but roaring, foot-stomping, tearful applause. People stood. Students shouted, "Encore!" A few were openly crying. The teacher who'd invited her stood frozen near the mic, face pale, eyes wide with shock and something else. Guilt, maybe. Or wonder. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let herself be seen. Not as the lunch lady, not as the quiet woman in the background, but as someone who carried a whole world inside her and had just shared it with everyone. Her grandson was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone, his face lit with pride and something like recognition, as if he'd just met a part of her he never knew existed. She gave him a small nod. Just enough to say, "Yes, this is me too." And in that moment, the prank didn't matter anymore because something far more important had happened. A broken piano had sung and a quiet woman had finally been heard. The sound of the last note hadn't even faded before the room exploded, not with laughter, not with polite applause, but with something deeper, something raw and real. People were on their feet before they even knew they'd stood up. A student near the front wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed but not caring. The drama teacher, still holding his fake sword from his Shakespeare bit, just stared, mouth slightly open. Even the custodian, who'd been leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, gave a slow, solemn nod like he'd just witnessed something sacred. She stayed seated at the piano, hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes still closed for a few more seconds. Not out of shyness now, but because she needed to hold on to the feeling. The warmth in her chest, the quiet hum in her bones that only music could bring. It had been so long, too long. And even though the piano was broken, even though the room had expected a joke, she'd found her way back to herself, if only for 3 minutes. Then she opened her eyes. The lights were bright, the faces blurry from the distance, but she saw him right away. Her grandson, standing in the middle of his science club group, clapping so hard his cheeks were red. He wasn't smiling. He was beaming, like someone had just handed him a secret he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. That look alone made everything worth it. She stood slowly, smoothing her blouse, and gave a small bow. Not fancy, just a quiet dip of her head. The applause only grew louder. Someone whistled. A teacher shouted, "Bravo!" She didn't know what to do with all this attention, so she just walked off the stage the same way she'd come on, calm, steady, like she was heading back to the kitchen to refill the soup pot. But the moment she stepped into the wings, everything changed. A woman she barely knew, the music teacher, the one with the kind eyes and always a pencil tucked behind her ear, rushed up to her, eyes shining. That was Chopin, wasn't it?" she asked, voice hushed, like she was afraid speaking too loud might break the spell. She nodded. "Yes, Opus 9, number 2. You played it from memory?" "Yes, on that piano." She almost smiled. "It's not the instrument. It's what you bring to it." The music teacher just stared at her like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had been sitting in front of her for 20 years. How long have you played?" "All my life," she said simply. And that was all she offered. But others were coming now, teachers, students, even the principal, who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. They surrounded her gently, not crowding, just wanting to be near her, to say thank you, to ask how she learned, where she studied, if she'd ever performed before. She answered their questions quietly, honestly, but without flourish. She didn't tell them about the conservatory, not yet. She didn't mention the scholarship, the dreams she'd set aside, the years of silence. Those were private things, sacred things, not for a crowd, even a kind one. Her grandson finally pushed through the small circle and grabbed her hand. "You never told me you could do that," he said, voice low but full of awe. "I didn't think it mattered," she replied. "It matters so much," he said, and the way he looked at her like she was suddenly 10 feet tall made her throat tighten. They walked out of the auditorium together, the noise of the show starting up again behind them. Someone was doing a magic trick now, but no one seemed to care as much as they had before. Outside, the night air was cool and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few stragglers heading to their cars. "Can we go home now?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, mijo. Let's go home." But home didn't feel the same that night. As they walked, he kept glancing at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Did you used to play in front of people a lot?" he asked as they turned the corner onto their street. "Once," she said. "A long time ago. Why'd you stop?" She didn't answer right away. They passed the corner store, its neon sign flickering. A cat darted across the sidewalk. Finally, she said, "Life gets in the way sometimes. You have to take care of people. You have to keep going even when the music stops." "But it didn't stop," he said. "It was just waiting." She looked at him, surprised. He was only 12, but sometimes he spoke like he'd lived 100 years. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. At home, he didn't go straight to his room like usual. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table watching her make tea. "Do you think maybe you could teach me?" he asked after a while. "Not just from videos. Real lessons. From you." Her hand stilled on the kettle. "I don't have a piano, mijo." "We could find one," he said quickly. "There's that thrift store downtown. They had an old keyboard last week. It wasn't great, but it worked." She sat down across from him. "Learning piano isn't just about pressing keys. It's about patience, about showing up every day even when you don't feel like it, even when no one's watching." "I know," he said. "I'm ready." She studied his face, the same determined set of his jaw that his mother used to get when she was focused on something important. And in that moment, she made a decision. "All right," she said. "We'll look this weekend." He broke into a wide grin, the kind that lit up his whole face. "Really?" "Really?" That night after he was in bed, she sat by the window again, just like she had the week before. But this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full, like the air was still humming with the notes she'd played. She thought about the way the room had gone quiet, the way people had looked at her. Not with pity or amusement, but with respect. Wonder even, it wasn't about fame. She didn't want that. But being seen, truly seen for who she really was. That was something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The next morning at school was different. She walked in at her usual time, thermos in hand. But the moment she stepped into the cafeteria, people noticed. Not in a loud way, but in glances and small smiles, in the way the kitchen staff greeted her with extra warmth. "Morning, ma'am," one said, and there was a new kind of respect in his voice. During lunch rush, students she'd served for years came up to her station just to say, "That was amazing last night." Or, "My mom saw the video," she cried. She didn't know what video they meant until one of the teachers pulled her aside. "Someone recorded it," she explained gently. "Just a short clip. It's been shared around town. People are calling it the miracle at Brookhaven." She felt a flicker of panic. "I didn't agree to be recorded." "I know," the teacher said quickly. "And we've asked them to take it down if you want. But if it's already touched so many people, it's not mean or edited badly. It's just beautiful." She thought about it. She didn't like the idea of strangers watching her without her say-so. But then she remembered her grandson's face, the pride in his eyes. Maybe this wasn't about her. Maybe it was about showing kids like him that you don't have to be loud or flashy to have something valuable inside you. "Leave it," she said finally, "but no more, please." "Of course," the teacher promised. By midweek, the story had spread beyond the school. A local news station called the principal asking for an interview. A community center invited her to play at their spring fundraiser. A retired piano tuner from the next town over showed up at the school with a toolbox and said, "I heard about that piano. I'd like to fix it if you'll let me." She didn't say yes right away. She thought about it. The piano wasn't hers. It belonged to the school. But something about the offer felt like a gift, not just for her, but for everyone who'd heard her play and felt something stir inside them. She agreed. The tuner came every afternoon that week, working quietly while students rehearsed for the spring musical. He replaced broken strings, realigned hammers, polished the keys until they gleamed. He didn't talk much, but when he was done, he played a few scales to test it, then turned to her with a small smile. "It's not concert hall quality," he said, "but it sings now. And it's ready for you." She thanked him, and when he left, she walked over to the piano and pressed a single key. The note rang out clear and true. She almost cried. That Friday, the music teacher found her during her break. "We'd like to do something," she said. "Not a big show. Just a small gathering, students, staff, a few parents. You'd play again. On the fixed piano. Only if you want to," she hesitated. "I'm not a performer." "You don't have to be," the teacher said. "Just be you." That's enough. She thought about her grandson, about the way he'd looked at her, about the years she'd spent believing her music didn't matter anymore. "All right," she said. "One song." The day of the gathering, the auditorium wasn't full. Just a few dozen people sitting in a loose circle of chairs around the piano. No stage lights, no microphones. Just a late afternoon sun streaming through the high windows, dust motes dancing in the light. She walked in wearing the same simple blouse she'd worn the night of the talent show. Her grandson sat in the front row, hands folded in his lap, eyes serious. She sat at the piano, took a breath, and played. This time the piano answered her perfectly, every note clear, every phrase shaped with care. She played the same Chopin nocturne, but it was different now, lighter, freer, like a bird that had finally remembered how to fly. When she finished, there was no roaring applause. Just silence, then soft clapping, then someone saying, "Thank you," in a voice thick with emotion. Afterward, people came up one by one, not to gush, but to share. A student told her the music helped her feel calm before a big test. A teacher said it reminded him of his grandmother, who used to play hymns on Sundays. The custodian just shook her hand and said, "You gave us something good today." And her grandson, he didn't say much. He just walked beside her as they left the school, his hand in hers, and whispered, "I'm going to be just like you someday." She squeezed his hand. "No, mijo, you'll be even better." That night, for the first time in years, she didn't just remember the music, she believed in it again. And that made all the difference. The days after that small gathering in the auditorium didn't feel like a sudden shift, more like a slow turning, like the way dawn comes not with a bang but with light seeping into every corner. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. She still woke before sunrise, still walked the same 10 blocks to school, still tied on her apron and started peeling potatoes by 6 a.m. But something inside her had changed, and the people around her could feel it too. It started with little things. A student she'd never spoken to before lingered after lunch to ask if she'd ever played Beethoven. A teacher brought her a cup of tea during break and said, "My daughter wants to start piano. Do you know any good beginner books?" Even the school secretary, who rarely left her desk, stopped by the cafeteria one afternoon just to say, "You've got a gift. Don't let it go quiet again." She didn't know how to respond to all this kindness. She wasn't used to being asked for advice, to being seen as someone with wisdom to share. For so long, her role had been simple: serve food, clean up, stay out of the way. Now people looked at her like she held something rare, something worth listening to. The biggest change, though, was at home. Her grandson started leaving sheet music on the kitchen table, printed from the library computer, carefully folded with notes scribbled in the margins. "This one looks cool," he'd say. Or, "Can we try this together?" He'd found an old keyboard at the thrift store, just like he'd promised, missing one black key and with a power cord held together by tape. But it worked. He practiced every evening after homework, fingers clumsy at first, then slowly finding their way. She'd sit beside him on the edge of his bed, watching his hands move over the keys. She didn't correct him right away. She let him make mistakes, let him feel the frustration, then the small victory when a phrase finally clicked. "Music isn't about being perfect," she told him one night. "It's about telling the truth with your hands." He looked up at her, eyes serious. "Is that why you stopped? Because it wasn't perfect anymore?" She paused. The question hit deeper than he knew. "No," she said softly. "I stopped because I thought the truth didn't matter if no one was listening." "But someone's always listening," he said. "Even if it's just one person." She didn't answer. She just reached over and adjusted his wrist, too stiff, too tense. "Relax here," she said, gently guiding his hand. "Let the music breathe." Word kept spreading. Not in a flashy way, but the kind that sticks. Through conversations at the grocery store, posts in neighborhood groups, quiet mentions at PTA meetings. A local paper ran a short feature, "Cafeteria Workers' Hidden Talent Brings School Together." The headline made her blush, but the article was kind, respectful. It didn't make her out to be a star. It just told the truth. A woman who'd carried music inside her all these years, and finally let it out. Then came the invitation. It arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped under her apartment door one evening. Inside was a handwritten note from the director of the community center downtown, the same place that hosted bingo nights, senior yoga, and after-school tutoring. They were hosting a spring concert for local artists, and they'd love for her to play. Just one piece. No pressure. "We've heard what you did at Brookhaven," the note read. It reminded us that beauty often hides in plain sight. She held the note for a long time, staring at the looping handwriting. Part of her wanted to say no. She wasn't a performer. She didn't own a fancy dress. She didn't even know how to work a stage mic. But then she thought of her grandson practicing on that broken keyboard, of the way his face lit up when she played, of all the people who'd told her, "Thank you for sharing that." Maybe it wasn't about being a performer. Maybe it was about showing up. She wrote back the next day, "Yes, I'll come." The week before the concert, she practiced. Not at school. The piano there was still being used for rehearsals, but at the community center itself during quiet hours. The piano there was older than the one at Brookhaven, but well cared for, its wood polished smooth by years of use. She played the same Chopin nocturne at first, then tried something new, a gentle piece by Clara Schumann full of warmth and quiet strength. She chose it because it felt like a conversation, not a performance, like she was speaking to someone she loved. The night of the concert, she wore her best dress, a simple navy blue one she'd bought years ago for her daughter's wedding. It still fit. Her hair was in its usual bun, but she'd smoothed it more carefully, tucked a single silver clip behind her ear. Her grandson insisted on walking her there, even though it was a 20-minute walk and he had school the next day. "You'll be amazing," he said as they turned onto Main Street, the community center glowing ahead with soft yellow light. "I'm just playing a song," she said. "You're showing people it's never too late," he replied. Inside, the room was filled with folding chairs, a small stage, and a crowd that looked like the town itself. Grandparents, teenagers, shop owners, teachers, kids with juice boxes. No fancy program, no spotlight. Just a piano, a stool, and a quiet hum of anticipation. When it was her turn, she walked up slowly, nodded to the audience, and sat. She didn't speak. She just placed her hands on the keys and began. This time there was no broken piano to hide behind. No prank to overcome. Just her, the music, and the truth she'd carried all these years. She played with the same care she used when stirring a pot of soup, steady, patient, full of love. And the room listened like they'd never listened before. Afterward, people didn't rush up to her with grand declarations. They just came one by one quietly. An older woman with silver hair held her hand and said, "My husband used to play that piece for me every Sunday morning. Thank you for bringing him back to me tonight." A young man, maybe 19, said, "I gave up piano when I was 12 because I thought I wasn't good enough. Maybe I'll try again." A little girl, no older than 6, tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "I want to learn like her." She didn't know what to say to any of them, so she just smiled and said, "Music is for everyone. You just have to begin." On the walk home, her grandson was unusually quiet. When they reached their street, he stopped under the street lamp and looked at her. "Do you think maybe you could teach other kids too, not just me?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "At school. After hours. You could show them what you know. I bet lots of kids would want to learn." She hadn't considered that. Teaching her? She'd never had formal training as a teacher. Just years of playing, of listening, of learning through doing. But then again, wasn't that how she'd raised him? Not with textbooks, but with presence, with showing up. "I don't know if the school would allow it," she said. "They would," he said firmly. "Everyone loves you now." She laughed softly. "It's not about being loved. It's about being useful." "And you are," he said. The next Monday, she went to the principal's office during her break. She didn't make a big speech. She just said, If it's all right with you, I'd like to offer free piano lessons after school, just for students who are interested. I don't need a classroom, maybe the band room or even the auditorium when it's free. The principal didn't hesitate. We'd be honored, he said. And the school will cover the cost of sheet music, if you need it. She started the following week. Only 3 students showed up the first day, 2 girls and a boy, all in middle school, all nervous, all clutching crumpled printouts of Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star. She didn't laugh. She didn't rush them. She showed them how to sit, how to curve their fingers, how to listen to the sound they were making. Don't worry about getting it right, she told them. Worry about making it mean something. Word spread fast. By the 3rd week, 8 students came. By the end of the month, 12. She didn't turn anyone away. Didn't charge a cent. She just gave what she had: time, patience, and the quiet certainty that every person, no matter their age or background, deserved a chance to make something beautiful. One afternoon, as she was packing up after a lesson, the music teacher found her. You've started something special, she said. These kids, they're not just learning piano. They're learning to believe in themselves. She shook her head. I'm just showing them the keys. No, the teacher said gently. You're showing them that the quiet ones have songs too. That night at home, her grandson was waiting with a surprise. He'd saved his allowance for weeks and bought a small metronome, shiny, red, with a little swinging arm. For your students, he said, handing it to her, so they can keep time. She held it in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, he said, because you gave me music. Now you're giving it to them. She pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. In that moment, she realized something she hadn't let herself feel before. Pride. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from knowing you've done something that matters. She hadn't set out to change anything. She'd just played a song on a broken piano. But sometimes one true note is enough to wake up a whole room, and maybe even a whole life. And now, every afternoon, the halls of Brookhaven High echoed with something new. Not just the clatter of trays or the buzz of announcements, but the sound of young hands learning to speak through music. And in the middle of it all was a simple woman, once invisible, now irreplaceable, not because she played perfectly, but because she played with her whole heart. And that, more than anything, was the real miracle. Spring turned to summer, and the heat settled over the town like a soft blanket. School let out, the hallways emptied, and the cafeteria fell quiet except for the hum of refrigerators and the occasional summer program volunteer grabbing a quick lunch. But even in the stillness, something new had taken root, something that wouldn't fade with the end of the school year. She still worked, of course. The summer meal program kept her busy, packing lunches for kids who depended on them, wiping down tables, restocking shelves. But now her days had a different rhythm. In the afternoons, when the sun slanted through the tall windows of the auditorium, she'd unlock the door and sit at the piano, the one that had once been broken, now polished and tuned, its keys gleaming like riverstones. The free lessons hadn't stopped just because school was out. Word had spread beyond Brookhaven. Kids from neighboring districts started showing up, some dropped off by parents who'd heard the story, others walking miles on their own because they'd seen the video online and just had to meet her. She never turned anyone away. If they showed up with curiosity in their eyes and a willingness to try, she made room. She didn't teach like a formal instructor. There were no exams, no rigid scales drilled for hours. Instead, she listened. She watched how a child's shoulders tensed when they hit a wrong note, how another's eyes lit up when they finally played a full measure without stopping. She'd say things like, let your hand rest like it's holding a bird, gentle, but sure, or that note isn't wrong, it's just waiting for the right moment to belong. One boy, shy and barely 10, came every Tuesday and Thursday. He never spoke much, but after 3 weeks he played a simple melody all the way through without looking at the keys. When he finished, he didn't smile. He just looked at her and said, I did it. She nodded and said, you did. And tomorrow you'll do it better. That was enough. Her grandson, now 13, had become her unofficial assistant. He'd help set up music stands, organize sheet music, even stay late to practice duets with the younger kids. He'd grown taller over the summer, his voice starting to change, but his love for music only deepened. One evening, as they walked home under a sky streaked with orange and purple, he said, I think I want to be a music teacher someday. She looked at him, surprised. Not a performer? He shook his head. Performers play for crowds. Teachers help people find their own music. That's what you did for me. She didn't answer right away. She just squeezed his hand a little tighter. The town hadn't forgotten what happened that night in the auditorium. If anything, it had become part of the local story. The quiet woman who played a broken piano and reminded everyone that grace often hides in plain sight. A local business owner donated a second keyboard for the lessons. The community center offered her a small stipend to cover supplies, which she accepted only after insisting it go toward buying beginner books for students who couldn't afford them. Then came the invitation she never expected. A small arts nonprofit from the next city over reached out. They hosted an annual Voices of the Community concert, a night dedicated to unsung local artists, storytellers, musicians who'd never stepped on a big stage but whose work mattered deeply. They wanted her to perform. Not as a novelty, not as a lunch lady who plays piano, but as an artist in her own right. She almost said no. The thought of a real stage, an audience that didn't know her, lights in her eyes, it made her stomach twist. But her grandson looked at her and said, "You taught us not to be afraid of being heard. Now it's your turn." So she said yes. The night of the concert, she wore the same navy dress, though this time she let her grandson convince her to leave her hair down, just a little, soft around her shoulders. The venue was a converted church with wooden pews and high stained glass windows that caught the evening light. The crowd was quiet, respectful, full of people who'd come not for spectacle, but for truth. She played the Chopin Nocturne again, but this time, it was different, lighter, freer, like she wasn't proving anything anymore. She was just sharing. And when she finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, it was deep, slow, the kind that comes from the heart. Afterward, an elderly man with a cane waited by the exit just to say, "My wife and I used to dance to that song in our kitchen. Thank you for giving it back to me." Back home, she didn't feel like a star. She felt like herself, just a little more whole. As summer wound down, the school prepared to reopen, but things weren't going back to the way they were. The principal announced that the piano program would become official, part of the after-school offerings with her listed as the instructor. They even painted a small sign for the auditorium door, "Piano studio open to all." She still served lunch, still wore her uniform, still walked the same 10 blocks every morning. But now, students waved not just because she gave them extra fries, but because she'd helped them find their first song. Teachers stopped by not just for coffee, but to ask how her students were doing. And every afternoon, the sound of hesitant notes, then confident chords filled the halls like a quiet heartbeat. One afternoon in early fall, as she was cleaning up after a lesson, the janitor walked in with a small box. "Found this in the old storage closet," he said, placing it on the piano bench. "Thought you might want it." Inside was a framed photo, yellowed at the edges but clear. It showed a much younger version of her, standing beside a grand piano in a formal recital hall, wearing a simple black dress, eyes bright with hope. On the back in faded ink was written, "Conservatory Final Recital, 1987. She hadn't seen this photo in over 30 years. She thought it had been lost in one of the many moves, one of the many goodbyes. Her hands trembled as she held it. "You kept it all this time?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "Saw it years ago when we were cleaning out the old music office. Didn't know who it was, but I figured someone might come looking for it someday." She hung the photo on the wall beside the piano, not as a reminder of what she'd lost, but of what she'd carried all along. Her grandson started high school that year. On his first day, he came home and said, "Some kids asked if you're really my grandma. I told them yes, and that you're the reason I believe in quiet magic." She laughed, but her eyes filled with tears. Life didn't become perfect. There were still bills to pay, worries about the future, days when her knees ached and the world felt heavy. But something fundamental had shifted. She no longer felt like she had to hide parts of herself to be accepted. She could be the woman who served lunch and the woman who played Chopin, the grandmother who packed school lunches, and the teacher who showed kids how to listen with their hands. All of it was true. All of it belonged. One evening, as they sat on their usual bench outside the school, now a favorite spot for students to wait for rides, her grandson asked, "Do you ever wish you'd kept playing all those years?" That you'd stayed at the conservatory? She thought for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft golds and pinks. A group of kids laughed as they walked by, one of them humming a tune she'd taught him that week. No, she said finally, because if I had, I wouldn't have been there when your mom needed me. And I wouldn't be here with you now. He leaned his head on her shoulder. I'm glad you came back to music. I never really left, she said. I just carried it quietly. And that was the truth. The broken piano had been fixed. But more importantly, something inside her, and inside everyone who'd heard her play, had been mended too. Not